public companies tended to do a better job when it came to hiring diverse candidates, and they certainly paid a premium for that. That was different than maybe what we thought, what the general market thought. So I think you see this trend that diverse candidates are being hired at a significantly higher rate, and ultimately they're being paid more.
Initiating Becoming a Hiring Machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we have an incredible interview ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space. Some days we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon, and what those mean for them. Come by every Tuesday. We have a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that will help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Every once in a while, we open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on, so send this to us at podcast@loxo.co. And finally, every once in a while, Matt will drop by and he'll have what we call a mic drop episode. He's going to share something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and thinks you should know about. All right, for today, things that make you uncomfortable to talk about in a professional setting: diversity or perceived lack of in leadership, and compensation relative to factors like diversity, the economy. Is diversity hiring glaring with inequity? Why would two people be offered different compensation packages for the same role? While most individuals and organizations would prefer to slowly back away from these topics, today we're going to dive right into the thick of them. We have Matt Mooney, co-president of On Partners, joining us. And I'm excited about this because they're an industry-leading retained exec search firm, not just in my book, but by organizations that actually carry weight with the list that they provide. So they consistently rank in the Forbes top executive search firms, Hunt Scanlon list, as well as being named to the Inc. 5000 multiple years running. So with that, I'm incredibly excited to introduce you all to Matt. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Okay. So you all recently dropped your 2023, or not so recently, it was a few months ago now, but we're going to talk about it today, the 2023 Talent Intelligence Report. And one thing that immediately jumped out to me about this report was that it isn't a clickbait report. It's rooted directly in your values and your approach. And you called it out right in the description underneath the title, where it's quote for quote, "Step into the future of talent intelligence where transparency and realism take center stage." So more specifically, instead of covering a different spin on something that's already published in other reports ad nauseum, you sink your teeth into something that many people are really scared to dig into, or they don't have the data to be able to report out at a statistically significant level. So with over 1,500 searches in your report, you are tackling things like executive hiring and diversity, compensation, and market trends. So before we get into some of those, tell me a little bit about what prompted you all to pull this report together.
Our philosophy at On Partners, we feel like we play an important role at the top end of premium retained executive search. And with that, as a trusted advisor, we always have this treasure trove of data. Some of it's anecdotal, some of it's structured in different places. So for us, we always felt we had a responsibility to give the clients and give the market direct feedback, very honest, unvarnished views of what's out there. So I think we've always aspired to do that. What we've been able to do over the last 4 or 5 months since we brought on our Chief Product Officer, Jen Rowe, is actually put more science and analytics behind that. So I think as you kind of alluded to, we go where the data takes us, whether it's the Talent Intelligence Report, whether it's market data that we provide clients during the search process. So what we were able to do is we started formulating the Talent Intelligence Report. We were now able, I think, for the first time to pull together analytics on a much more sophisticated basis. And that's what led us to the Talent Intelligence Report. And I think as you referenced, there are a few surprises that were baked in there. It didn't necessarily lead us where we thought the data would lead us. It kind of blew in the face of some of the conventional wisdom that's out in the market. It kind of contrasted some of the things that even Census or Government Bureau of Labor Statistics data would show. So it's been a little bit disruptive and provocative to see where that data took us.
Yeah, and I have a question before we even get into this that I'm thinking as you say this. So a lot of these are topics that a lot of people usually will shy away from. But now that you have the data to back it, and just with the value and emphasis that you all provide in transparency, do you find that your partners trust you all more because you're willing to have these conversations, to share this data with them, instead of being like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to answer that question, and you worry about how that might affect your relationship together?
Yeah, I think if you're truly going to be a trusted advisor, you have to tell clients, candidates, the market, things that sometimes they don't want to hear. But ultimately, if you're going to do this for a long time, if you're truly going to add value, if you are going to be trusted, you have to be comfortable doing that. I always feel in some ways, hey, history will sort out who's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We feel strongly that based on the data that we are seeing, based on the market trends and themes that we're seeing, we're going to present that without an agenda, just putting those facts forward, letting the data speak for itself, and going built based on the facts and the data that we have at this time. We want to present that accordingly, and not try to spin it. Sometimes it goes against our self-interest. Sometimes we'll provide market to a client in a search, or in case of talent intelligence, it's a little bit disruptive and it's a bit provocative, but the data backs it up. We stand behind the data. And I think for us, again, we'd rather get in trouble. We'd rather get fired for telling the truth and being right, and seeing that borne out over the coming years, than tell you something or tell the market something that's not accurate.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's where transparency meets realism, and not just sticking your head in the sand and pretending it's not the way it is.
Right.
All right, so we've got the report pulled up. You all have it on your website if people haven't read it yet, but I want to jump down to the first common narrative that you all pulled. So have it up over here. Pay equity for women and people of color in leadership is slow moving. For example, full-time year-round working women earned 84% of what their male counterparts earned on average, according to the Census Bureau. So tell me a little bit about what the data that you all found spoke to with this common narrative.
Right. And it is a common narrative. I mean, I think if you poll 100 people on the street, everyone's going to cite something in and around that range. So I think we assumed that was the fact. We see, again, anecdotal themes and trends that pop up in our data as we're working on these top level, high profile retained executive search projects. But as we really pulled back the data, as we looked at the numbers in a different context, we found a theme that maybe wasn't 100% in alignment with that standard narrative. And I think that's what prompted us to dig deeper, to look at some of the nuances in the data, and come up with market themes and trends that really flew in the face of this 84% number that we've all kind of worked with and built on over the last decade.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit so you can see some of this. But yeah, there's a lot of different data and visuals within here. So are there any certain aspects of it that you do want to jump in? Do you just kind of want me to scroll through it and you can add some context to them?
Look, I think the high level, when we look at themes and trends, obviously over the last 3 or 4 years, what we found from a high level, that public companies tended to do a better job when it came to hiring diverse candidates, and they certainly paid a premium for that. And so that, ultimately, that was different than maybe what we thought, what the general market thought. So I think you see this trend that diverse candidates are being hired at a significantly higher rate, and ultimately they're being paid more in this current climate.
Okay, so you say they are paid a premium, they're paid more. Is that relative to just what they were paying these individuals before the spotlight was put on it, or what's the normalization here?
The normalization, that's, they're paid more than non-diverse candidates in this current market. When we look across a pretty sizable data set, you've seen a pretty significant swing.
Okay, so that's the public company side. And then I know another part was you looked at this on the private equity VC backed side. Did we see the same kind of story there?
We saw on the private company side across the board, we tended to see that number kind of invert back to what the traditional narrative would look like. And again, I think that was a little bit of a surprise. It was a little bit different, but to see public companies making commitment, making significant strides to diversify teams, to be willing to pay a premium to do that, we saw private companies revert back to closer to that 84% number that I think we would have expected coming in.
Interesting. Do you have any theories, thoughts around why we might see them going in two different directions?
I think if you look at the environment over the last 3 or 4 years, I think public companies in particular, probably felt more pressure,
Mm-hmm.
put more resources behind efforts to diversify their senior leadership teams. And I think because of that, so I think tremendous intent. I think when you had this kind of flood of activity to focus on this topic, naturally scarcity is going to drive compensation to go higher.
Mm-hmm.
So it created certainly a beneficial bidding war in the market for a relatively smaller subset of talent. And so I think those companies are willing to pay more, willing to be more aggressive, willing to really push to hire top talent across the board. And I think that benefited. I think private companies maybe don't feel the exact same sense of urgency,
Mm-hmm.
or didn't put the same resources, or were simply outbid by larger public companies that were willing to put tens or hundreds of thousands of extra dollars behind some of these key senior level hires.
Yeah. I wonder if there's almost a little bit of the long term, short term vision with public and the private. So, public is, you have your stakeholders aren't just the executive leadership team or the board, you have public stakeholders. So, when you have that pressure and they're also in it, they're looking at how does this affect us not 5 months from now, but 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. Whereas a lot of the VC backed organizations, your runway's up in a year and a half. You have to get results or else. So, I wonder if they're how that skews, and it's hard to know without sitting in those rooms where the decisions are made at the end of the day, but I can only guess at some of that.
Right. And certainly the smaller companies, the private companies, have limitations. They can't pay unlimited budgets for
Mm-hmm.
particular roles or particular functions. So I think we recognize that even if they continue to have intent, they're just going to simply be outbid in a market that was extremely frothy over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so speaking of the market, let's get on to the second common narrative. So, compensation, the inflation defying warrior. The prevailing view here is that pay is finally rising faster than consumer prices, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The average pay for top executives last year rose 7.7%, according to a report from Equilar. That raise beat out inflation by 1.3%. What did your data find there?
Yeah, that was another one that was, I think, surprising to us in some ways. If you scroll down, trying to get an accurate view on where are we in terms of the inflationary cycle,
Mm-hmm.
where is this thing? Are we continuing to rise at an irrational rate, or things finally starting to taper off? And when we looked at compensation, clearly the themes around coming out of COVID, 2021 into 2022, across the board, there was just a frenzy in hiring, an incredibly competitive landscape for talent, for top
Mm-hmm.
talent at the senior executive level. So we saw that inflationary pressure, just the complete frenzy for top talent. It did continue to drive those numbers higher and higher, and it continued to drive at nearly a 10% rate as we look at senior leadership. So we'll see where that evolves on the back half of 2023 and into 2024. But at this stage, we still have continued growth on the compensation side that I think is going to be problematic for hiring companies. It's going to be empowering to a number of candidates as well.
Mm-hmm. So before we start to get into some splits that you all saw between public and private equity, so 2022, as you were saying, post-COVID boom, I noticed that there were a lot of leaders in that time also when they were like, I don't have to be in an office all the time. I can live wherever I want. And what it did for companies was it opened up the entire, the marketplace. They're not just constrained to New York City, to San Francisco, to wherever they're headquartered, but you can get talent anywhere. So now it's almost shifted a little bit in the candidate's favor because they can work for any company. They can command a higher price if they want it. Did you find anything like that with some of the searches that you all were working?
We absolutely did. And I think part of that was a bit of a double-edged sword, because, hey, great companies on the West Coast could now hire talent from Atlanta or Austin or Northern Virginia and have the ability to pull those people in. I think the theory was, okay, those are lower cost wage markets we can go get great talent maybe 20 or 30% cheaper. I think what that feeding frenzy ultimately fueled, though, was top talent from Atlanta now for the first time had the option of going to work for great West Coast companies. And yeah, because they had more and more opportunities, that quickly drove up compensation even in lower cost markets. So companies in maybe smaller markets that hadn't had to be as competitive because people didn't want to relocate to the West Coast, suddenly now they don't have to. Wages continue to cycle further and further up the scale in all these markets. So I think we saw the compensation rise across the board because of that. Initially, we thought, okay, companies can go higher in smaller markets and save money. It may have worked initially, but in the end, it's just driven everything up.
Yeah, and I think the smart companies figured that out early on, because I know I worked at a remote-based company before this as well. Beside Locks, it was remote-based, but we said, I don't care if you live in Omaha, Nebraska, or if you live in San Francisco, we're going to pay the rate of the top end of the market. So if you do live in New York, if you do live in San Francisco, we're going to be competitive there. But if you choose to live somewhere else, great. We're not going to penalize you just because of your current location. So, okay. So now moving into some of the differences that we saw between public companies and the private equity. So the story here is a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when we saw 2023, the first quarter of 2023, we saw a slowdown in the market across the board. I think there were just so many question marks, so much uncertainty. Public companies tend to be faster to react to that. They've got shareholders, they've got quarterly profits, they've got things that they have to be attuned to and stay on top of on a consistent, shorter timeline. So we did see those wages start to really flatten out as we came into 2023. I think that trend has continued to hold throughout this year. So they'll still be competitive for key strategic senior level hires. They will pay up, but not quite at the same level that I think everyone got used to in 2021 and 22. In private equity, that we have not seen that slow down yet. We've just continued to see acceleration from a wage perspective. I think we're finally starting to see some softening and some shuffling within the private equity world. And to look at the data back half of 23, fourth quarter of 23 into 24, I think it will be telling to see where that goes. But we are seeing significant turnover on senior executive roles at the board, CEO, CFO, CRO level within the private equity environment. We're seeing more of that shuffle going on in the last 2 or 3 months, which again just feeds into that cycle. So in some ways you think, okay, private equity is not going to go up and to the right forever in terms of wages, but that trend, it'll be fascinating to look at that data over the next few months and see how those trends hold.
Yeah, and if it lags the public, because the publicly traded companies, they are tied directly to the stock market, so it makes sense that they're going to very closely the lag time between stock market impact from economic situations and then their decisions is much tighter than the VC piggy bank, so to speak, that has kind of a different timeline. So yeah, it's interesting that that sustainability piece of it too. I wonder if the individuals that do want to go to the publicly traded companies are thinking about their career, their legacy that might come from it, and they're willing to say, I know I'm going to be here for 5 years, 10 years. I'm willing to take, you saw a lot of execs do this at COVID and before, I'll take the salary cut for now. That's completely fine. I want the company to be happy. I want our employees to be happy. So again, there's all those little nuanced stories that we don't have the data on, but it always makes me wonder how some of those could or may not even be impactful within those decisions.
Right. Yeah, agree completely. I think, this 2023 has been a disruptive year on so many different levels. So I think as we get more data, I think fourth quarter is going to be telling in terms of where some of these trends go. And obviously you've got geopolitical elements as well as some of the macroeconomic issues. So this is going to be an important inflection point, what happens over the next 3 months and how that impacts wages and what that does to overall economic momentum.
All right, so let's pull out from the report now. Curious, you call this the talent intelligence report. So we've been kind of talking a little bit about what we think we might see in 2024. I mean, if you just look at the market overall, what things excite you about what's to come? What changes do you think might be on their way, good or bad? How are you all thinking about and approaching it without giving away any of your secrets? But just curious to hear thoughts from your perspective.
Yeah, I think you still see I think you still see a high level of uncertainty, both from public and private companies. No one's quite sure where we are headed, where we are in an economic cycle. I think when you look at Q1 of this year, everyone was convinced, hey, we're going to see a major slowdown. We're headed towards some definition of a recession, and that just never really materialized. So a lot of that psychology has softened a bit, but I think the current climate in fourth quarter now still is still uncertain. So I think for us, we are seeing more of that shuffling of senior teams that, particularly on the private equity side, as the world became more challenging, as the cost of debt went up significantly. I think in Q2, companies sort of ignored it, kind of whistled past the graveyard a little bit. I think Q3 we saw a significant pivot to say, okay, good enough is no longer good enough. We need to get great in
Mm-hmm.
here to help us navigate a market. In a lot of ways, we were on a 10-year run where everything was up and to the right, money was nearly free, everyone looked pretty smart in that type of climate, and we're seeing the first maybe legitimate headwinds that we've seen in the last decade. COVID being an anomaly. That's not a traditional economic cycle. So for us to face some level of slowdown and to require a different type of senior executive team, it's not a surprise. But the reality is the many of the current crop of senior executive leaders haven't been through the same level of adversity at this level. So
Mm-hmm.
I think as we look to 2024, I think you're going to see companies continue to take a hard, honest look at senior executive teams. Do we have the right type of leader that fits the current climate? And are they equipped to help us work through whatever level of adversity or headwinds that we're going to bump into? I think you have still that constant evolution when we look at things that continue to happen within digital transformation, when we look at the rise of AI and all the related technologies around that. The hype got significantly ahead of the reality. I think the reality will begin to continue to catch up
Mm-hmm.
in 2024. So anything in and around AI and machine learning, those are going to be hot topics. We just need it to be grounded and more substantive than the hype that probably overwhelmed everybody in Q2, who assumed that we were going to be doing this all Chat GPT, and you and I would be no longer needed for
Yeah,
anything.
it's here
So
to take our jobs.
yeah, it's so hey, the reality is maybe not quite as glitzy and sexy. So I think those are a couple things that we'll look to see how they evolve and how they change heading into 2024.
Okay. And you touched on two things in there that I get really interested about just from a conversational aspect. The second one of those, I'm going to go in reverse order of what you spoke on, but you were talking about, do they have the right type of executive to help them grow to weather the storm? So this is a little bit different from finding new candidates to come bring in. But when you're looking at that, are you able to partner with some of your clients to help them figure out whether it's assessments, other offers? Like, how are you being a strategic partner there?
That's a big part of what we do, and I think back to kind of us joking about generative AI and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Ultimately, when you look at candidates, senior executive candidates, board members, CEOs on paper, a lot of them on paper will fit the spec. They'll fit the bill. It's that ability to further assess culture, assess some of the key metrics that determine who can be successful, identify some of the key derailers that automatically say, hey, this person's not going to be successful because of this. Those are key pieces that I think we get really good at. We talk a lot about the art and the science to retained executive search, and that's a big part of it. It's a lot of those nuances that work around culture fit and have you truly been through challenges. How much of your success was attributable to you? How much of it was just environmental? You were a good solid player who just happened to get on a really fast train that was going to do well whether you made an impact or not. So there are a lot of those things we really work to discern and segment what is top talent, what type of talent can come in and impact this situation at this stage in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And so the concept of top talent, how do you make a great hire? So very high level, vague, but I'm always curious to hear everyone's different opinions on. There's always that kind of the X factor, something that people see in individuals that just go on to be like the perfect hire, the great candidate, truly top talent? Are there any little things that you've noticed or trends with those types of individuals that you usually don't find on paper, but just some type of, I don't know if it's a personality quirk or something that they possess?
We tend to look a lot, the drive around intellectual curiosity, topics like intellectual curiosity, learning agility. Can I put you in 2 or 3 different environments and you're going to figure things out? Um, I think that's a big one. Communication skills, it's a universal, but it's amazing how often that people have that ability to either communicate or they don't. And that's so critical, particularly when things aren't going well, when you
Mm-hmm.
face adversity, when you face challenges. We talk a lot about, that intersection of IQ and EQ. Yes, we need you to be very, very smart, but also that ability to read the room, to read the boardroom, to understand the thinking and the climate and the current within your senior executive team. Some of those things are harder, obviously harder to measure on paper. You can pull them through with assessments and referencing and behavioral interviews and things like that. But those are the things ultimately that determine who's successful and who's not successful.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at backgrounds, if you put forth 10 great candidates that you and I would identify on paper, yes, they all probably could technically do the job. The people who are successful are the ones that are going to be the great culture fit, demonstrate that learning agility, have that extra gear when it comes to communicating, inspiring, and leading. That it's the intangible side of that makes it very difficult.
Yeah. And it's not easy to find, especially for a lot of organizations. And that's where it's like having partners like you all who know how to spot those, put them in scenarios to pull those questions out or get to that insight. So I love it. Appreciate
and,
you.
that, and I was going to say, and in
Yeah.
every organization is different. Like we could line up, just like we could line up 10 executives that look identical on paper. You could line up 15 companies that generally look, hey, similar size, similar industry, similar stage, and they're going to have radically different cultures. So the ability to understand what makes this company tick, what works
Mm-hmm.
well, what doesn't work well, that's more of that nuance that we have to get very good at identifying at the senior level in order to find something that fits.
Yeah. It's not just matching the job description, but so much more with the company, the industry, the market, the growth stage of the company, and all of that. So, oh, fascinating. I feel like you and I could talk about that for hours, or you could talk about it and I would absorb for hours gladly. So, appreciate the conversation. Before we wrap, any last minute thoughts that you want to share or places people can learn more about you all?
Yeah, certainly. Look, I think, on partners, I think we've really, you can tell we enjoy this, right? It's, we enjoy being provocative. We enjoy being disruptive. We enjoy taking this data and putting it out in a way that we hope stimulates conversation. We think that's good for the market. We think it's good for executives just to have good, candid, honest conversations. So, we definitely enjoy people kind of weighing into the discussion with us. Let's have interesting debates about hot topics, and that's ultimately what gets us to a better hiring decision, a better overall economic climate, a better environment where we can truly diversify senior executive teams and create opportunities and create winning solutions for all parties. So that's what I think that's what we get excited about. That's where we feel we add significant value. So yeah, would certainly love a chance to continue these type of conversations. The talent intelligence report, this was just the foundation of where we're going to continue to go. I think with our enhanced capability to look at data and analytics and really drive more of that detailed, provocative data, we want to continue to build on that. So you see talent intelligence report, that will be an ongoing series, but we have a number of other pieces and components that we'll be launching here in the coming months. So we'll look forward to everyone getting a chance to look at that and certainly engage in the conversation with us as well.
I love it. Well, stay tuned for that. Good little teaser, and we might just have to have you back on to go over some of those. Perfect. Well, for people who want to find you, find On Partners, learn a little bit more, any places you recommend they go to first?
Sure thing. Always onpartners.com. The team does a great job of putting great content and data there. LinkedIn, all the social platforms, we are there. And again, we enjoy putting out content, putting out information for people to respond to and engage with us as well. So excited to to have more people join the conversation.
Love it. Well, Matt, truly appreciate you coming to join us for this show. Your wealth of knowledge, and I know that this is going to inspire some recruiters, some organizations to really start asking these tough questions of themselves, their organizations, their partners moving forward. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. You can find the show notes and description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. We also have full video episodes. So what we were talking about here when we were screen sharing today and everything else, you can find that on our website, on YouTube. But that does it for today's episode. So that was an incredible interview with Matt from On Partners. Until next time, bye y'all.